Hey everybody, Matt, and I'm back with you. Hope you're okay. Welcome to Manchester, and we're going back 200 years today for another of Tom's stories looking at Manchester's dark and gruesome past. What is today's story?
Today we're going back to 1828, and it's another poisoning story.
Oh.
This time it's arsenic.
Okay, let's see where we end up.
So today's murder is a truly diabolical murder. It resulted in the death of a 4-year-old girl, Susanna Rigby, and the injury of 8 other people. However, none of the people that it injured or killed appear, or indeed were, the people of which the malice was intended. So we're heading out today to Ancoats. Now Ancoats at the time was not an inner city suburb of Manchester. It was its own little village town, if you like. And in fact it's called Newtown. Now all that's left of the architecture from that time really is not this, but the canal. The canal was still here. And indeed the little town of Ancoats was springing up back in 1828 because of this lovely canal, the Rochdale Canal, of course, which goes to Todmorden.
Oh yes.
One Monday afternoon in June 1828, there was a young girl, Janet Frame, playing on the Butler Street area, which is this area of Manchester, Ancoats even. And she was approached by this lady who said, she had big teeth, big protruding teeth, and she said, "Hello, would you take this cake and a shilling and take it to the shop of the Mr Drummond, please? My name's Mrs McCann." And the girl, Janet Frame, the 9-year-old, said, no, I'm going home now. Ask that boy over there." So the lady who had protruding teeth and small features and a shawl went along to the boy, John Thompson, who was 8. "Hello, would you take this cake that I've made, a mere fruit muffin, and these 2 6-penny pieces, a whole shilling in old money, would you take them? Would you take them to the shop of Mr Drummond?" The boy says, "Oh yeah, I'll take the cake to Mr Drummond. And make sure, boy, make sure that you say Mrs McCann gave you them." So the boy hops off to Mr Drummond's shop on Richmond Road.
So this area obviously looks very different. I believe it was probably blitzed quite badly here, which is possibly why there's so much redevelopment.
I think it went through quite a lot of changes. I've got a couple of maps to bring up, and the first map's from 1824, and in that map you can see the streets are laid out here, and there's a bit of activity on Richmond Street and some of the others, but there's not a lot. But you can see where all the streets are laid out. The 1836 map, which is a little bit later on than our case today, has got all the some more houses, but there's still quite a lot of open space in this area. Obviously it was built up by the canal, but yes, I think it's had a lot of changes. I think it will have changed again by the time of the Industrial Revolution, when they need to build more back-to-backs and everything like that. Anyway, this sort of area was Richmond Street. I think I said Richmond Road. And on the corner of Richmond Street and Prussia Street, I think it's this one, there was Mr Drummond's shop, a provision dealer So the boy, John Thompson, he goes in and he says to Mrs Drummond, Mr Drummond's out, he says to Mrs Drummond, here's a cake, it's from Mrs McCann. And the lady says, Mrs Drummond says, well, I don't know any Mrs McCann, and I'm sure my husband doesn't, so here, I'll just leave the cake in my window and someone will come. You go, boy, and see if you can find this Mrs McCann. So he ran back down, only to that bridge, which is where he'd met her in the first place, to see if he could find Mrs McCann, but he couldn't. She'd vanished into thin air. And he came back to the shop. And the lady said, well, take the shilling for your time. So he took his two sixpences and he left the cake there. He then decided to go to his mother's work, which we're going to go to now. So the boy, John Thompson, he ran to his mother, who was working at the factory on Jersey Street here. Again, not very far from where all this took place. And he says to her, mother, I've been given this shilling. He tells her the story, and she thinks he's lying. She thinks he's stolen the shilling off Mrs McCann. So she sends him, and obviously she can't just leave her work at the factory. She sends him and a little girl from the factory to go and find out if the story's true. They go back to the Drummond shop, and indeed, it turns out that the story is true. The mother, Grace Thompson, after work, decides to go back to Mrs. and Mr. Drummond's shop. She goes in and she demands that the lady must give her the cake, because she believes that Mrs. McCann had meant to give the shilling to Samuel Drummond and the cake to the boy for going. Well, Mrs. Drummond doesn't know really what to make of it, and she says, I don't think so. No. But eventually she just wants to get rid of Grace Thompson, so in the end she gives her the cake and she takes the shilling. Grace Thompson, on her way from the shops back home to also on Jersey Street here, she breaks up the cake and distributes it between 9 different people, including one quite old lady and various neighbours and friends. She gives a small portion to a little girl, Susanna Rigby, a 4-year-old, who happens to live in the same house as her on Jersey Street. Unfortunately, all the 9 people who get it, including her boy, her 2 children, in fact, who take this, they all get very sick very quickly, and their throats start to burn. And unfortunately for Susanna Rigby, the 4-year-old girl, she dies. She can't get it out of her system and dies. No one quite knows who Mrs. McCann was. At least they didn't to begin with. The Drummonds obviously were questioned. Grace Thompson went straight back to Samuel Drummond's shop and demanded the shilling that she'd given him from Mrs. McCann. Aye. Grace Thompson went straight back to Samuel Drummond's shop and she demanded the shilling off him. She then took that shilling and bought some medicine for all the people that she'd unwittingly dosed. Samuel Drummond, of course, could not think who he had pissed off enough to warrant that kind of level of poison. It was enough to take out a small elephant. Half of the cake was left. So, the cake was analysed and it was found to have arsenic in it. Oh, Samuel Drummond could think of 2 ladies who had protruding teeth, and one of them he had upset because he'd remonstrated her for rent. It wasn't until a little bit later on, one of his neighbours reading a newspaper and the description of the lady happened upon his own daughter-in-law, Mrs. Elizabeth MacDonald.
So now Manchester is in the distance. I'd say it's what, maybe about a mile?
About a mile. Hence where the name Miles Platting comes from. Now, platting means crossing over a brook. Now, I know this isn't a brook. I know it's an offshoot of the loch, but still. And it's about a mile out of Manchester. Wow. And whilst the canal says that Miles Platting is a quarter of a mile that way, back in 1824, Miles Platting was mainly focused around the Varley Street and Collyhurst Street area. In fact, Collyhurst Hall was a big, which was in Vauxhall Gardens by the 1800s, was a big area for Mars Plateau.
Can't say you don't learn things on this channel.
You can't. Now, Elizabeth McDonald, Liz McDonald, if you want to be copyrighted.
Not
Jim,
that one.
Not that one. Not that one.
They're in Manchester.
Liz McDonald, she had gone back to live in this area with her father because she had separated from her husband, who lived next door to Mr and Mrs Drummond. Elizabeth McDonald's father, Mr Brown, had a shop somewhere in this area. It was a bakery. He made cakes that were very much like this giant muffin that she'd done, a whole pound cake of fruit, in fact identical to it. However, the evidence was such that Mrs McDonald, Elizabeth McDonald, was never had any charges brought against her because her father, he lawyered up. He employed a Mr Stansfield, a lawyer, and he said that he was a very respectable man and he could provide all the answers as to why Elizabeth McDonald had not done it. And so, unfortunately, Susanna Rigby, her case still remains unsolved. But it is quite clear from the evidence that Elizabeth McDonald had protruding teeth. Janet Frame and the boy both said that they said it was her, except Janet Frame, who was the only one that was allowed into the inquest at the Town Hall Tavern. She would not swear to it, and so because that evidence was a little bit dodgy and they wouldn't listen to the boy who was outside, she got off with it. She got off with it. Now what happened from then on, I don't know, because Mrs McDonald probably had good grounds to divorce against Mr McDonald. He probably wanted one. But yes, a very unhappy tale, and poor Susanna Rigby never got any justice for it.
200 years on.
200 years on.
Wow. Okay folks, there we go, another story from Manchester's dark past going back 200 years. So thank you for another interesting one. Wow, thank you so much for bringing very evil Mrs McCann to life.
I think the evidence is clear that it was indeed Liz McDonald.
Yeah.
I think that protruding teeth and the fact that she was married to a neighbour sort of, I mean, but the newspapers at the time seemed to think perhaps she meant not give it to the Drummonds at all, and perhaps it was meant for her in-laws, which the message would be don't live with your in-laws. And they never seem to explore the idea that maybe she could maybe she could have been having an affair with Mr Drummond, or indeed one of his children, and it could have been intended indeed for them. But got off lightly.
Definitely got away with it. Yeah, the acting performance, I mean, the dark side of the Moors gain is the RSC's loss there, definitely. But people have been asking about your podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
Can you remind us of
Myth,
where?
Mystery, Law and History. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can get podcasts.
Yeah. Dark Side of the Moor merchandise on our T-Mail store. We've just put up all our Christmas goodies, so do have a look on there if you want to buy somebody a very special Dark Side gift. And yeah, that's about it. Please like, share, comment and subscribe. We will be back in Manchester for another story soon, but we'll have a little break and do a few of the bits first. But yeah, plenty of stories from this time that we can cover. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you very soon. Bye for now.